Erev Chag Sameach. I really appreciate all of you taking time on a Sunday night in a very busy time of year filled with many things to do, to learn a little, Torah, to engage with some of the themes, some of the very important themes of the Yom Tov, and to just be together in learning and in preparation. We're going to talk tonight about getting ready, about the first things we do when we get ready for the Seder. And on a personal note, I always am very optimistic about Pesach Sedarim in a leap year. I always think, oh, I've got a whole extra month. Pesach is going to be so late, and I'll be so ready to have everything koshered and cleaned and organized weeks before it arrives. And of course, here we are. And Pesach night is in 5 nights, and I'm not ready by any stretch of the imagination. But I know many of you are, because you've been asking me amazing kashrut shilas. Clearly people are doing things, and that's great. But I'm not with you. But I hope to get with you. And one of the ways that I've been getting ready, though I have not kashrut anything, is through learning. And through learning some of these topics, which we're going to explore tonight, which are really about how we get ready for the Seder, and then how we are meant to experience the Seder. So how we get ready and how we're meant to experience it. And we'll jump into, before we jump into the learning, I'll ask you this. What's the first thing that you do when you start to get ready? What's the first thing you think of, like, first thing I got to do? What's that first step that you take when you're starting to get ready for Pesach? It might have already happened weeks ago. It might start happening this week. But what's that first thing? What's the first action? Schlepping up the dishes from downstairs, making a list. What's the first thing? You could put in the chat. Getting rid of chametz, right? Eat all the pasta, drink all the beers, right? Getting rid of all that stuff. What else? What are some first things? Making lists, Paula. Yep, absolutely. Anyone other first things you do? Well, I'll share the first things in the halacha, and it's actually very interesting. Oh, wait, hold on. I'm out of practice with my Zoom skills. The first thing that you're supposed to do, according to the halacha, is what we should see on the screen here. Okay. Shulchan Aruch or Chaim, this is the first siman, the first chapter in the laws of Pesach, in the Shulchan Aruch, the code of Jewish law. And the Mechaber says, Sho'ali b'hilchot Pesach kodem lePesach shloshim yom. First thing we do is we learn the halachot of Pesach for 30 days before, right? We start the day after Purim, we start learning the halachas of Pesach. And that's what we started doing in shul in the mornings. We do our daily halacha. We learn Hilchot Pesach right after Purim. And then the Ramah adds, the first action, however, beyond just studying, Haga, the Ramah says, Uminhag liknot chitim l'chalkan la'ani l'tzorach Pesach. We have the custom to buy wheat to give to the poor for Pesach. So the first action described in all the laws of Pesach in our halachic code, the Shulchan Aruch, the very first thing you do, beside for learning, the first physical action, is not to make a list, is not to get the dishes ready, is not to get rid of the chametz, it's to give money to the poor so they can afford Pesach. That's the first thing. And the first thing in the Mishnah, this source number 2, the first thing in the Mishnah which describes Leil HaSeder, right? There's the 10th chapter of Masechet Pesachim in the Mishnah is all about the Seder night. And the first thing that we do as we get ready for the Seder night, says the first Mishnah in the chapter that deals all with Seder night, Arvei Pesachim Samuch LeMincha, famous Mishnah, don't eat until it gets dark. Okay, we fast. Then, V'afilu, this part, Anisha b'Yisrael. Even a poor person amongst the Jewish people, Lo Yochal Ad Sheyasev, he should also fast and not eat until he's reclining. And the communal officers must give him no fewer than 4 cups of wine, and they must do so even if he receives relief from the charity plate. So the first Mishnah in the chapter that deals with the Seder night preparations is about kind of not eating to get ready for the meal, and then right away, again, the poor. First Mishnah reminds us we have to make sure the poor are cared for and they have 4 cups to drink. And then in the Hagadol Pesach, once have arrived to the Seder night, and we're really ready to do that big mitzvah of the night, which is to tell the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, the first thing that we mention in the Magid section, once we've hit the section of telling the story, really what we're there to do, the essence of the night, the first thing we say, Halach ma'an yid'achlu ahavtana v'harad Mitzrayim. Kol divchin yitei b'echo. The first thing we say, this is the bread of poverty, which your ancestors ate. All who are hungry, come and eat. All who are hungry, come and eat. So the first things in the halachic Sfarim, in the Shulchan Aruch, the first things in the Mishnah, the first things in the Seder night itself, have to do with the poor and making sure that the poor are included and are able to participate in the Pesach festivities. That's the primary teaching of those sources. Now, why is this so central? And why do we think about this before the Chag? So there's a wonderful story of the great Raftali Tzvi Horowitz of Ropshitz, the Ropshitzer Rebbe. And the Ropshitzer Rebbe was known for his, he was a great darshan, a great drashot, and he had a sense of humor. And there was once he was giving a Shabbat Hagadol drasha like this, not on Zoom, obviously, but like this, the Erev Pesach, getting the people ready for Pesach. And he focused on this theme of supporting the poor, because that year in Galicia, it was a very bad year economically. Many people were struggling. People were hungry. It was a very, very difficult time. And this was the Shabbos Hagadol drasha. He said, there's a stira in the Rambam. There's a contradiction on the Rambam. This is typical, a famous drasha format. You present two ideas in the Rambam. They seem to be opposed, and then you reconcile them. So what's the stira? The stira is, on the one hand, it says in the Rambam that every single person, including a poor person, has to drink the 4 cups of wine. But on the other hand of the Rambam, it says that if you steal, it's a lo taseh. Stealing is a violation of the Torah. It's a really big deal. So the Rav Shitzer said we have a contradiction. On the one hand, the poor have to drink, but on the other hand, they have no money and they can't steal. So how do we resolve this contradiction? Turn to the audience. He said, my friends, especially to the wealthier members of the audience, he said, you can resolve this stira. You can resolve this contradiction. How? By giving maus chitim, by doing what the Shulchan Aruch said. If you give money to the poor, they will both have the 4 cups of wine and they won't steal. Very cute drasha. So the story goes that when he got home, his wife asked him, were you successful? His goal was to encourage the people to give Mount Chitim and for the poor to receive it and to be able to have their meals. And he says, I was 50% successful. I convinced the poor they should receive the donations. So 50% successful. So tonight we're going to go for 100% success. We want to convince everybody to both give and receive. There's a deepness and an importance in giving. There's a deepness and an importance in knowing how to receive as well. And that's going to be some of the themes of the night. So let's go back into the sources for a little bit and explore this concept, though, of Mount Chitim a little more deeply. It's actually a very interesting halachic concept. All right, can go back into the sources. So let's look at the first source here, the Sharet Zion. Sharet Zion. The Sharet Zion is a commentary from the Rabbi Meir Kagan, who was the author of the Mishnah Berurah. He wrote his own commentary on his own sefer called the Sharet Zion. It's like halachic glosses on the Mishnah Berurah. And he says as follows: why do we have this special mitzvah to give maus chitim on Pesach? We don't have a special tzedakah mitzvah for any of the other regalim. There's no mitzvah to give money to the poor to build a sukkah. There's no special mitzvah to give money to the poor to have apples and honey. Only Pesach has this like special category. Even Purim, where you have matanot levyonim, it's not really so much for the sake of them being able to have the Purim Suda. It's like a general thing we give to the poor. But Pesach, it's really specific. Like you give this money so that poor will be able to have the 4 cups of wine. Will be able to celebrate Pesach in its fullness. So he says, why is that? Why does it have its own? Why is Pesach specifically have its own mitzvah? And he gives a simple reason. He says, chametz is forbidden, and matzah is sometimes hard to purchase. It's expensive. Pesach is expensive. Anyone who's been to Hungarians this year, or any of the stores, not just Hungarians, I don't want to pick on Hungarians, any kosher grocery store knows buying kosher Pesach food is expensive, sometimes needlessly so, or even exploitatively so. It's a big problem that Pesach is expensive. It's very serious. And he says if we don't supply what the person needs for the full duration of the holiday, it's possible he'll be hungry, right? Chas v'shalom, like someone was trying to make Pesach and they just can't afford it and they go hungry. Or chas v'shalom, someone says, you know what, this holiday is too expensive, it's crazy. I don't want to participate in this insane, price gouging. I'm just going to eat whatever I want to eat. And they're going to eat chametz, and that will come to kilkul. That will come to they'll experience a religious fall because they'll be eating chametz. So a very prosaic, simple reason the Shari Tzion says why we have this extra focus on giving to the poor at the beginning of all the Pesach preparations. It has its own name, it has its own mitzvah, because it's so expensive. It's a good reason. There's a famous story. There's a famous story of the Brisker Chaim of Brisk, who's a great rabbi who was known. There was a saying that he said. He's known as being a primarily great halachist, brilliant Talmid Chacham, the Brisker methodology, very conceptual, very high level Torah learning. He was also a profound carer of the poor and of the community. And there's a beautiful story that one time a woman came to the Brisker Rav on Erev Pesach and said, Rebbe, I have a shaila, I have a question. May I use 4 cups of milk at the Seder instead of 4 cups of wine? And the Brisker Rebbe paused and reflected on it, and his students were all around. And he said, it's better to use wine, and here, I want you to take this money, and so you can purchase wine for the Seder. And he handed her a very large sum of money, way more than a bottle of wine would have cost, $100 instead of the $20 she might have needed for the bottle of wine or its equivalent. And so she left, and his students were kind of perplexed. They said, well, why did you, if you needed wine, why don't you just, it's nice you gave her the money, but why did you give her so much extra? And he said, my students, if she was asking me about drinking milk for the Seder, that means that she did not have enough money to buy meat, because she would only drink milk if she was having a Parv Seder. And I realized that she did not have enough money, not only for wine, but for anything. So that's why I gave her this money, so she could also buy meat for the Seder. And that story just reflects the sensitivity and that awareness of the needs of the other, and making sure that, especially at Pesach time, but really all the time, that people have what they need in order to do what they need to do religiously, communally, familially. That's astute sensitivity that he showed. So that's one idea, that it's just really expensive to celebrate Pesach, and we have to make sure people can celebrate Pesach. But we're going to learn a little more deeply. And let's take a look at the Rambam. So this is the Rambam. Actually, the Rav Shitz quoted this Rambam earlier. The Rambam says, Kol echad ve'echad, bein anashim ben nashim, every single person, whether a woman or a man, chayav lishtot b'layla hazeh arba kosot shel yain. Everyone has to drink 4 cups of wine. Every single person. Man, woman, child, everybody. I mean, not child, I'm sorry. But man and woman, every grown person has to drink 4 cups of wine. Ein pochatin mehem, but we don't reduce. You don't say, oh, you get 2, you get 1, you get 3. No, everyone has to drink 4. And even the poor person has to drink less than 4. And Tosfot, commenting on that, on the Mishnah here, even a poor person in the Jewish people, lo yechal ad sheyasev, has to recline, has to have 4 cups, has to really do the mitzvah at its fullest. It says, why does the Mishnah point this out? Why does it say, if there's a mitzvah, like when the Torah says don't kill, it doesn't say don't kill, and also the poor people shouldn't kill. It just says don't kill. It applies to everybody. So why does the Mishnah have to specify a certain kind of person is also obligated in that? The Torah doesn't say that poor people are exempt from, or that poor people are also included in the mitzvah of respecting one's parents, or of davening, or of giving korbanot. Like, of course, they're just people. They're included. Why does the Mishnah go out of its way to say even poor people have to participate in this way? Because Tosfot says you might have thought that the reclining of a poor person is not reclining, right? You might have had a bias, kind of a cognitive bias. You might have said to yourself, Pesach's a great night, and for those who can afford it, it's really nice that they drink 4 cups of wine. For those who can afford it, it's nice if they recline. And if you can't, like it kind of makes sense. Like you're not really rich, so you're just pretending. Like, so yeah, you don't get to drink the wine, you don't get to recline if you're not wealthy. Tosfot says, no, that's wrong, right? That's what you might have thought, and that's where you're wrong. The Mishnah wants to teach us that every single person can reach this state of reclining and luxury and wealth and spiritual wealth, which we'll talk about more in a little bit. Everyone can reach that on Pesach night, even if it comes at a bit of a challenge, right? The Yerushalmi says as follows. Why does the Mishnah say that a poor person has to be included? That it's actually a little hard. It's unpleasant for a person to denigrate himself and eat from the charity box, right? So that when the Mishnah said that even a poor person has to drink the 4 cups, even if they have to take it from the collective charity, it's one, as Tosfot said, to make sure that we don't exclude them in our thinking, but 2, to tell even the poor person, hey, you have to do this. Even if it's a little bit awkward, for you to go to the communal charity plate and say, I don't have enough for 4 cups of wine. To go to the Reb Chaim of Brisk and say, can I drink milk? Even if that feels awkward, you have to do it. Everyone is obligated in this mitzvah. And we'll learn a source from Reb Chaim Kanievsky. Reb Chaim Kanievsky Zatzal, he passed away this spring, last month. And for those of you familiar, he was one of the an unbelievable Torah giant. Reb Chaim Kanievsky, every Pesach, I'm not exaggerating here. This is not an exaggeration. Every Erev Pesach, Reb Chaim Kanievsky would make a siyum on the entire Shas, the Shas Bavli, the Yerushalmi, the entire Mishnah Torah, the entire Shulchan Aruch, the entire, I'm going to leave stuff out, I don't even remember all of them, the entire Torah, Shulchan Aruch, Bavli, Yerushalmi, I want to say the entire Zohar, and more. Every single year, he would do that. He would make a siyum on all those things on Erev Pesach. It's unbelievable Torah giant, a tremendous loss for the Torah world. Politically complicated, that's a separate aspect of his leadership, but from a Torah perspective, just an unbelievable inspiration of what it means to dedicate one's life to learning of Torah on the highest level and with the most commitment and passion and dedication possible. So we'll share this little bit of Torah. I wanted to share some of this Torah as we have just lost him for our community. Chaim. Right. So Rav Chaim says, oh, sorry. I showed you my notes. Wrong one. Wrong slide. Apologies. Okay. Chaim Kanievsky explains that this Yerushalmi, which points out that it might be a little bit awkward or unpleasant for a person to ask for communal funds to have the 4 cups of wine. Says this line comes to explain the innovation that we refer to an impoverished person who derives sustenance from communal charitable funds, since it is unpleasant for a person to partake from. All right, so one might think that since the 4 cups are a remembrance of freedom, and since this form of charity is unpleasant to the taker, it's not in the manner of freedom, right? You might say if the whole point of Pesach is to feel free, and in the lead up to Pesach, if someone's going to have to kind of humble themselves a little bit and ask for help, that's not freedom, right? Freedom is, I'm free from everybody. I've got nothing to lose. I don't owe anybody anything. You might think that's freedom. He says, no, that's really not what it's about. And if it takes a little bit of a personal humbling of oneself, what this is teaching us is that the publicizing of the miracle of Passover is important enough to render a poor person obligated in just the same. That what's happening on Seder night is more important than even someone's feeling a little bit awkward or a little bit humbled in the days leading up to ask for it, because something so significant, we're hitting such a significant spiritual reality on Pesach night, and every single person must be a part of it. You don't get exempt if you feel a little awkward. You don't get exempt if you feel it's a little hard for you. You don't get exempt. I'll go on my soapbox for a second here. People often ask about having an early Seder, or, can we start way early because the kids, it's hard. I think for one night a year, maybe 2 nights a year, to say, no, we're going to throw out the bedtime rules. This night is so different. You are going to stay up till 1 o'clock in the morning if you can, 2 o'clock in the morning, because something is happening that's so significant that we all have to be a part of it. We all have to be involved in this. And what is it that's happening that's so important that every single Jew, rich, poor, young, old, man, woman, has to be involved? Rav Shagar says the Mishnah comes to teach us. Rav Shagar, a great 20th century and 21st century, comes from a very religious Zionist, a Dati Lumi world, but also has kind of a postmodern, beautiful take on a lot of things. He says as following, that the Mishnah comes to teach us that every Jew is a free person, a master of themselves. And on Leil Seder, the night of freedom, he conducts his meal according to this norm. On Seder night, the poor person pushes off their daily experience of time and reaches the ideal reality. He reaches the ideal reality, the reality of a free person. For on this night, in actuality, this becomes their tangible and real experience, right? So even if the day before you had to go to the soup kitchen and say, I need help, I need some wine, I need some chicken, whatever I need, that gets all erased once Seder night happens. And on Seder night, the poor person pushes off that previous reality and becomes a king or a queen, becomes free, totally free. That's the magic of Seder night. That's what's happening. Therefore, the establishment of the law of leaning and drinking wine of the poor person at the beginning of the chapter that deals with the laws of Seder night is not a coincidence. Leil Seder represents freedom, equality, and brotherhood. That's what it is for the Jewish people. The idea that comes to be expressed here is that poverty is contrary to freedom. Poverty, says Rav Shagar, is contrary to freedom. I want to just pause on that idea for a second because it's a significant idea. The idea that poverty and freedom are in contradiction. When we think about poverty, I often think about there's two forms that are often discussed. There's absolute poverty and relative poverty. Absolute poverty is defined as the deprivation of basic human needs, right? And like severe deprivation of basic human needs. So food, basic needs, water, safe water, sanitation, health, access to health care, shelter, those basic needs that everyone needs to be alive and to thrive in the world. If you're deprived of those, you experience what's called absolute poverty. Then and that's absolutely a barrier to freedom, right? If you don't know how you're going to feed yourself, you can't really feel free. If you're worried about starving to death every day or how are you going to feed your kids, that severely limits one's freedom. But there's another form of poverty, which we call relative poverty. And relative poverty is an individual's perception of his or her own material condition, and it's defined relative to the others around you. So I recently saw a news article that was saying on TikTok, there is a trend where people are saying, if you have $2 million, you're actually kind of poor. You're actually poor if you have $2 million. Why? Because there are people with $2 billion or $20 billion. They showed how much 2 million is compared to 2 billion. It's a big differential. And relatively, sure, relative to $2 billion, $2 million is not very much. But of course, if you have $2 million, you've got everything you could possibly need. You've got everything that it takes to live a healthy, vibrant life if you have $2 million. So that's relative poverty. And relative poverty, it's really interesting to think about, especially, in the times we live in today, where on the one hand, there's great inequality, tremendous economic inequality in the world. And also, it's a time when the average poor person in America enjoys luxuries that the wealthiest people, certainly 2,000, 1,000, 500, 200, even 100 years ago, could not have imagined. It's a bizarre reality. You can have people that are poor and that experience themselves are poor and relative to others are very poor. And at the same time, things like electricity and access to healthcare and information and medicines and hot water and entertainment, the kind of things that are available to someone who is on the lower end of the economic spectrum today would be unthinkable to even the wealthiest people, the top 0.1% for almost all of human history. So it's really interesting It's really interesting. And of course, the converse is true, right? There are people who are fabulously wealthy on paper, billionaires, but are also very poor, on some of the things that really matter. Maybe they can take care of their immediate material needs excellently, but on some of the other needs that make a life beautiful and good, and all the things that we know are really important. We'll talk about those in a little bit. They can be very impoverished, and I've met both. I've met people who are living just above absolute poverty, who are incredibly fulfilled and happy and profoundly happy. I heard a quote from someone who said, we didn't grow up. He had a very happy childhood, and without a lot of resources. He said, we didn't grow up poor, we just didn't have any money, right? So there are people who are not poor, they just don't have any money, but they are very well off. And there are people who are incredibly wealthy, who are not. And it's just interesting to reflect on that. And I think part of the Hagadol Shel Pesach, and part of what we're doing on Pesach, actually helps us get into that mode. First, it helps us get into it by thinking as we prepare about making sure that everyone is included no matter their economic standing. That's the first move. But then on the Seder night, something interesting happens. We start to experience ourselves as wealthy, right? We lean, we drink wine. These are symbols of great wealth and freedom, and it's amazing, and everyone's included in it. But also, we also imagine ourselves as poor. As we say, in every generation, a person must view themselves as having left Egypt, right? Every person must view themselves as having that they've left Egypt. Go into the mindset, the reality of ourselves as leaving, as being slaves, and not only that, we're supposed to think of ourselves as whoever. I'm just going to mute whoever has just jumped on. There we go. We are supposed to imagine ourselves as completely dependent upon God for whatever wealth and enjoyment and luxuries that we're experiencing tonight. We say it's 100% contingent upon God taking us out of Mitzrayim. So the wealth and the luxury and the freedom that we experience is not something that we did. It's not something to be taken for granted. It's something which even could go away any second. As we say, Avadim Hayinu L'Far Mitzrayim, we were slaves to Pharaoh in the land of Egypt. And if the Holy One, blessed be He, had not taken our ancestors out of Egypt, behold, we and our children and our children's children would all be enslaved to Pharaoh in Egypt. We'd all be enslaved, still now, right? And that's why we have to tell this story, because we recognize that everything we have is contingent upon that act of freedom, that act of liberation. And if that act had not happened, we are meant to tell ourselves and imagine ourselves as still being destitute, slaves, and poor. And that's very profound. And of course, these aren't the only ways we kind of imagine ourselves or start to entertain the idea of our own lacking and poverty on the Seder night. Of course, what do? We eat the lechem oni, right? We eat the bread of poverty. We eat the maror. We imbibe and bring these things into our bodies, the bitter maror, which reminds us of slavery. And then, and I love this, when the meal ends, you could have had the most fancy Seder meal on the most fancy silver plates and on 7 courses. You could have it all. But at the end, the last thing that every single Jew is going to eat at the Seder is the crummiest dessert. Apologies for the pun. Couldn't help myself. It's the afikomen, right? It's like the humblest, most, it's not even a dessert. It's like the last taste in our mouth is the bread of poverty and affliction. And it's not a luxurious taste. It's not like an amazing dessert, which we end the meal with. Wow, like what a bang. We end on a very, very humble note. So the Seder is both exalting and exalts everybody, rich and poor alike. Rich and poor alike drink 4 cups of wine. Rich and poor alike recline. We're all free. We're all like kings. We're all living on this very exalted level. It's also very humbling, right? We eat a humble dessert. We eat things that are bitter, that remind us of our own slavery. We tell ourselves we did not get ourselves out of Mitzrayim, right? It's not a night where we celebrate, look how awesome we were. We threw off the oppressor. Like, we're so great and strong. We freed ourselves, like any other Independence Day. Think about the 4th of July or, Bastille Day, right? These are days where the people celebrate their own freedom, their own acts of freedom, not on Leila Seder. We didn't do anything. Not even Moshe Rabbeinu gets mentioned. It's all Hashem. And if Hashem hadn't done it, we'd still be dirt poor in Mitzrayim. There, but for the liberation of Hashem go I, right? It's a very humbling move. So this, of course, I think is very relevant to us today. If you think about our contingency, our dependence on our lack of independence or interdependence on one another, but really ultimately on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and whatever benefits we enjoy now, whatever luxury, freedom, etc. we enjoy now, how fragile and how contingent that is. If you ask the Jews living in Goshen, right, when the Bnei Israel went down to Mitzrayim and Yaakov and his sons were living there, they're living in Goshen. It was very good in Goshen. They were very wealthy in Goshen. Everything was great. They were at the top, cream of the crop. Everything was luxurious and splendid. And then things changed very quickly. And they went from the top to the bottom. And we know in today's world how quickly things can change. We look at people living in, Kiev. Think about someone living in Kiev 6 weeks ago. Their life, a middle-class person, an upper-middle-class person living in Kiev, their life probably looked much like my life, very similar. And things can change so fast. And you can go from being comfortable, have 4 cups of wine, no problem, to running for your life and not knowing where you're going to be and not having a home and not, having any sense of security and living in real poverty, and absolute poverty, how quickly things can change. And that's, I think, something we're meant to reflect on, just to bring with us on Seder night, the tenuousness of our own comfort and the tenuousness and the reality of this, the fortunes and the cycles that go on in the world around us, and our responsibility, if we are sitting, in a place where we can help, to reach out and to help others, to help lift them up, and to feel that freedom and that liberation. And this is really, I think, the final act of the Seder, to really tap into that on a very deep level. If we look at if we look at the next few sources, which are focusing on the final half of the Seder, after the meal, after the Magid, after all that luxuriousness, there's a beautiful minhag after the meal is completed, after you've had that humble dessert, that the Baal HaBayit is the one who recites the Zimun for benching. Normally, on a Shabbos meal or a Yontif meal, the host usually asks a guest to lead the Zimun. Says, hey, so-and-so, my honored guest, will you please lead us in benching? That's the custom. We do that except Seder night. Seder night, the Baal HaBayit, the host, is supposed to lead benching. Why is the host supposed to lead benching? Nagu sheBaal HaBayit, mevarech b'Birkat Hamazon. The Ramah says he leads it. Why? Shneimar Tov Ein Hu Yivorach. He says the generous man, as it says in Proverbs, the generous man, literally, Tov Ein, is blessed. Tov Ein, like a good eye, someone who looks with a good eye. The Humikri Tov Ein, why is he called the good man, the generous man? Why is the Seder leader called a generous person? She'amar kol divchini tev, because he said, let all who are hungry come and eat. Because the Seder leader at the beginning of the Seder made a proclamation and said, all who are hungry come and eat. And because he said this, that qualifies him as a generous person. And on Seder night, a generous person shall be the one who leads the blessings. So what makes this man so respected? What makes this person so, deserving of the bracha? Not because he's fancy, not because he gave us this amazing meal, but rather because he welcomed in the poor. That's why. And then we bench, and benching is all about gratitude for God and awareness of our dependence on God. God is Hazanet Hakol, God sustains all. And then after we bench, we pour a final cup. We pour a final cup for ourselves, and we also pour a cup for Eliyahu Hanavi, for Elijah the prophet. Now, who is Elijah the prophet? So Elijah the prophet in Tanakh is a very intense, firebrand, bit of a zealot. He's a big kanai, he's a big prophet who wants the Jews to follow Hashem and gets mad when they don't, and really a zealous guy. In the Gemara, however, in the eyes of Chazal, the Midrash, the Gemara, he's not a zealot. He's the opposite. He's a poor person. He shows up. He's like this magical figure who appears in very different, different places in disguise, almost always as a poor person, as a leper, as a sick person. And he teaches lessons to the people that he encounters. And most of those lessons have to do with the poor, with appreciating what one has. It's a beautiful story in the Gemara and Nedarim that we'll look at, where Eliyahu Hanavi shows up for Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, the story is in the Gemara and Nedarim that Rabbi Akiva was engaged to the daughter of Kalva Savua. Kalva Savua was the wealthiest, or one of the top 3 wealthy Jews living in Eretz Yisrael. In the Gemara that discusses the destruction of Yerushalayim, he's one of the 3 that sustains the whole city when they're under siege, fabulously wealthy. And when Kalva Savua finds out that his daughter is engaged to this 40-year-old crazy Baal Tshuva shepherd guy who has nothing, which is Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva had incredibly humble beginnings, though he grew to be an amazing teacher with 24,000 students. His beginnings were as a illiterate shepherd until he was 40 years old. So when he found out that his daughter was engaged to an illiterate shepherd, he cut her off. Said, "You don't get any of my money. You have to be poor now." And so they were poor. They were probably absolutely poor. Rabbi Akiva and his wife Rivka. And the story is that in the winter they would sleep in a storehouse of straw. And Rabbi Akiva would gather strands of straw for her hair, very poor, living in straw. And he would said to her, "If I had the means, I would place on your head a Jerusalem of gold." So this beautiful crown, these crowns they used to wear. There was like the outline of Yerushalayim, golden crown, put it on their head. And, they're living in poverty. Comes Eliyahu. Eliyahu the prophet came and appeared to them as a regular person and started calling and knocking on the door. He said to them, "Give me a bit of straw. Give me some straw. You guys have straw. I don't have any straw. I need straw, as my wife gave birth, and I do not have anything on which to lay her." Right? You, Rabbi Akiva, Rivka, you guys have straw. I don't even have straw for my wife who just had a child. Rabbi Akiva said to his wife, "See this man," who was Eliyahu Hanavi, he didn't know it, but it was. "See this man who does not even have straw? We should be happy with our lot. At least we have straw to sleep on." So Eliyahu Hanavi is coming here to teach this message of appreciating what Rabbi Akiva has. And by the way, this is a message that I would not encourage anyone to take it on themselves to teach to people. Right? This is a message you have to be open to and understand yourself. This isn't something you can go up to someone and say, "You should appreciate what you have." Doesn't work that way. That's often can be experienced as very insensitive or even offensive. But it is a message which we can learn ourselves. This is one of those messages that you have to really learn inside your heart on your own. But when you do, it's very profound. When you can come to see, you know what, I may not have as much as other people have, but wow, I have a lot and I have what I need. And that's a blessing. If we can learn that message, that's a very, very, very good message to learn. And that's the message of Eliyahu, and that's the message of Kos Eliyahu, of that last cup, of bringing his presence into our Seder after we've done the luxury and the reclining of the 4 cups, of the 3 cups up to this point, and the meal. It's to reorient ourselves and to remember, like, what's really important. What's really important? What really is wealth and freedom all about, right? Pesach is this night of wealth and reclining and freedom, but like, what does that actually mean? What do we mean when we say wealth and freedom and reclining and wine? It means what the Mishnah says, Ezu Ashir Hasamech B'chalko. Who's someone who's rich? Someone who rejoices in their lot. Someone who appreciates what they have. That's what makes you rich. What makes you rich is food in your belly. What makes you rich is a roof over your head. What makes you rich is people around you who care about you. Being able to tell your story and the story of your people, freedom, that's wealth. That's wealth. It's not who has the fanciest meal or who went on the fanciest program. That's not wealth. Wealth is joining the collective journey of Pesach, from slavery to freedom, from Galut to Yerushalayim, a roof over your head, a song in your mouth, Hallel in your heart. That's what freedom is. And that's really the last section of the Seder. It would be amazing if we could understand and internalize this message 365 days a year. It would be even more amazing if the whole world could understand and internalize this message. If people really understood that true wealth, true happiness, true fulfillment comes from having the basic things that we need and being able to appreciate them with others that we care about. That's really all it is. The world would be a much better place. The problem is not that we don't have enough things in the world to give to everybody or enough food. There is enough. We know how to make enough. We have more than enough. The problem is that we don't understand this message. This is Putin's problem, right? There's going to be a tremendous crisis in our food system in the next year or two because of the war happening in Ukraine. It's a war based on greed. It's because he wants more. He wants more power. He wants more wealth. There's never enough wealth and money and power. But because of that destructive attitude, so many people are suffering and will suffer. If we could spread this message, this Pesach message of focusing on the poor at the beginning and then focusing on ourselves and what really makes us wealthy, what really brings us meaning and joy and fulfillment and true spiritual wealth, if we could spread that to the whole world, it'd be a Pesach world. It'd be a redeemed world. And it does feel far away, but maybe it's closer than we think. Maybe it's closer than we think, at least for one night a year, at least in our own lives and in our own hearts, that if we set things up right, if we open up our shul, and I want to encourage everyone, if you or someone you don't know is still trying to figure out their Pesach plans, to come to the open Seder, to come join us. There are about 50 of us already who are signed up to be there. And if we open up our shul, if we open up our tables, if we open up our wallets and give to our brothers and sisters here in Israel, fleeing from Ukraine, if we open up our hearts to this message, the world could be a little different. And maybe the world could be a lot different. Maybe the world could get closer to that redemption that our sages teach us will happen also in Nisan. It says in Nisan we were redeemed, and we're also atid in ligael. In the future we'll be redeemed also in Nisan. And I think it's because of this teaching, this fundamental, simple teaching of Pesach, of this focus on true wealth, this focus on poverty and wealth in the deepest sense. And I'll end with a story. This is a really powerful story I heard recently that actually has to do with what many of you probably did today. I'm sure some people on this call or their friends or family members delivered Ma'od Chitim today, an amazing mitzvah, going back all the way to our first source about that first thing you're supposed to do when you start getting ready for Pesach, Ma'od Chitim. You plan your Ma'od Chitim time. So the story is that there's an organization in Brooklyn that it does the same type of thing, delivers food to Jews who might need food in getting ready for Pesach. And there was an occasion when a volunteer had signed up, and that volunteer had to cancel, so they hauled a backup volunteer to go deliver a certain package to a certain address in Brooklyn. So the backup volunteer got the package and schlepped all the way to this address, and it was a bit out of her way, and she was a little farmushed about it, but she got there, and she rang the bell, and it was a survivor. The survivor opened the door, and this woman, the volunteer, smiled and handed this package, said, "Have a good Pesach." And the woman who received the Pesach, the elderly woman, just stood there and stared at her with her eyes wide open, very awkwardly. And the volunteer sort of felt uncomfortable and didn't really know what to do, and finally just said, "Is there a reason why you're staring at me?" And the recipient said, I don't mean to be rude, but are you related to Mrs. Schwartz? And the volunteer said, "Yes, that Mrs. Schwartz, that was my mother of blessed memory." And the survivor turned white. And she said, "Please, I need you to sit down with me for a minute. I need to tell you a story." She said, "Your mother and I were in a camp together. We were in the very same barrack. And one day, your mother came to me, and she was almost delirious from hunger. And she told me that if she did not get something to eat, she was not sure if she would make it to live for another day. And she begged me for my little bit of food. Now, as I'm sure you know, we had almost nothing. But when I looked into your mother's eyes, I saw that she was telling the truth. And I knew that she wouldn't make it. And so even though I was desperately hungry, I gave her the small bit of food that I had. And the next day, your mother came to me with tears in her eyes, and she said that I had saved her life. And she did not know how she would ever repay this kindness. And then I never saw your mother again. Hearing the story, the volunteer began to cry. She realized that if it were not for this woman and the kindness that she gave her, she probably would have never been born. Her mother would have not made it, and she would have never been alive. The survivor continued. She said, I live very modestly and I have very little. But when you walked in, I was reminded of this event in my life, an event that feels like it was a lifetime ago. And I can see your mother standing before me again. And today, with you standing here before me and delivering this malchitim, the kindness has been repaid. That's wealth. That's the ideal reality. That's the wealth we're all aspiring for on Pesach. The wealth of kindness, the wealth of a roof, the wealth of a meal, the wealth of a story, the wealth of a smile, the wealth of Pesach. So as we get ready to celebrate this night and to lift up this Friday night and lift up our glasses 4 times, I hope you'll join me in the tefillah that everyone in the world, every single Jew, every single person in the world can experience that wealth, whether they're in our homes, in Skokie, in Poland, in the Ukraine, in Israel. Every single person can taste that wealth at least for one night. And maybe through the tasting of that wealth, the world can get one step closer to its ultimate redemption. So with that, I want to thank you for joining me on this night and wish you a Chag Kasher v'Sameach, and a wealthy, wealthy Chag, a joyous Chag, a rich Chag. And just thanks everyone for joining tonight. Chag Sameach. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.